In recent months, Rabbi Beerman has also often advocated for a Judaism that enjoys life and community. Especially in times where we feel great darkness, we need the search for light. Rabbi Beerman had made this his mission. I look forward to your lecture and thank you all for your attention.
It is my honor this evening to deliver this distinguished Hildesheimer lecture, which has previously been graced by presenters who are the most eminent Jewish scholars of our time. I am humbled by the invitation and deeply grateful for the warmth in which I and my delegation, including my colleague, Rabbi Dr. Stu Halpern, have been received by this community, by the Rabbiner Seminary, by the great rabbis of the community, represented by Rabbi Spinner and Rabbi Apfel, by Sarah Serebrinsky, whose warmth has really, even in the cold winter days, has brought us a great feeling of welcome, by the broader Jewish community, by Dr. Schuster, the president, who's just doing such an outstanding mission and purpose for not just for the Jewish people, but for Germany, for Europe, and for our society. To be here with our academic partners, Humboldt University, and to be blessed by the presence of Vice President Tal Meir, representing the executive board and the president. It is truly an outstanding honor to stand here with you tonight. Dear friends, the story with which I will speak this evening is not a sad one. It's a story that is filled with challenges and pitfalls, with struggles and even tragedies. But fundamentally, it's a story of hope and optimism. As Dr. Schuster referenced, in times of darkness, the seeds of redemption are planted. The lecture will focus on the medieval development of a rabbinic idea of a fellowship between Jews and non-Jews. It's certainly noteworthy that great rabbis contemplated a noble community of Jews and non-Jews even during the harsh periods of the High Middle Ages. In light of the contemporary moment throughout the world, and especially on college campuses, I believe it stands as a model that we can access that guides us today in how to forge alliances. Our focus this evening will start in Provence in the 13th century. Like in other areas in Christian Europe, life was not easy for the Jewish communities in Provence. The second half of the 12th century included a turn in anti-Semitism that scholars have called demonic anti-Semitism, in which Jews were suspected of some of the worst crimes. It was at that time that blood libels rose from England and then spread throughout. It was the time where there was a rise in forced conversions and apostasies, which brought new Christians with knowledge of the Talmud, former Jews who studied the Talmud, into the Christian world, and those apostates began using their knowledge with distorted, selected quotes from the Talmud to attack the Jews. And that has begun the disputations that we see all throughout the 13th century and even leading to the burning of the Talmud. Well, we will start our story as a conversation in Provence during that period in the 13th century by Rabbi Meir ben Shimon Hamiili, who's one of the great scholars and sages, with the Archbishop of Narbonne at the time. And the Rabbi Meir ben Shimon Hamiili recorded his conversation in a book that is called Melchemet's Mitzvah, that we've found and has since been annotated by the great scholar Robert Chazin. And we will begin with their conversation. The Archbishop comes to the rabbi and he says, "I've been hearing things about your Talmud that is disturbing to me. You know, there are a lot of rules that apply that seems like they only apply to the Jews, but in the Jews' relations to the non-Jews, they don't apply. So, for example, the Archbishop says, "Indeed, you must acknowledge that as you judge me, so may I judge you. It would be only fair that I would treat you as you treat me. Now, behold, it is written in your Talmud that robbery of the Gentiles, theft from the Gentiles, and the Gentiles' funds are all permitted to you. Also, concerning the return of lost goods, you say that such goods belong to you and need not be returned to their owners. Since this is your view of us, we may likewise judge you, failing to return your loans and even that which Gentiles robbed from you." Now, this was a very serious claim against the Jews, that they would believe that they could rob from non-Jews, and the threat, which was very imminent, of communities that were built on those who lend money because they were forced out of other professions, that the Gentile, that the non-Jewish neighbors would not be obligated to return those monies, leaving the community impoverished. What is your response, Rabbi? How do you handle these claims? So the rabbi says, to explain, he says, somebody has mistranslated to you our Talmud. What was said there permitting the funds of the Gentiles and his lost goods refer only to those who are part of the 7 nations. The 7 nations is referencing the 7 nations of Canaan of early antiquity, where the Jews who left Egypt, or their children who entered into Israel, they were given license in certain ways because they were idolaters, because the Canaanites were idolaters and guilty of weighty sins, or to those who follow in their wicked ways. But concerning a Gentile who is not an idolater, we are actually commanded to sustain him. As it says in the Talmud, Ger Toshav, we'll talk what that is, you are commanded to sustain him and also to return him his lost objects. Ger Toshav means a Gentile who accepts on himself to not worship idols, even if he does not accept any other commandments. In fact, they say in the Talmud, the Gentiles outside the Holy Land are not idolaters at all. Rather, they only follow the custom of their forefathers. The rabbi says that according to the Talmud, there is no such thing as an idolater of the 7 nations of Canaan outside the land of Israel, outside that period and that time. Moreover, it is well known from your sages, he says to the Archbishop, that you believe that a creator is without beginning or end, is one, created both the upper and lower worlds, is immanent but unseen, examines the heart, rewards the good, and punishes the wicked. This is the essence of the faith that one must hold. Hence, it is proper, the rabbi says, to sustain you and to guard your persons and your goods. You likewise are commanded to sustain us and to guard our persons and all that we own. The rabbi introduces to the Archbishop, actually, there are 2 different categories. There's a category of the Gentile, of the 7 Canaanites that lived in the time of antiquity. And then there's another category, which applies to you, our dear Christian neighbors. Now, to focus on just one aspect of what the rabbi speaks of, we'll focus on the commandment to return lost objects. That it says in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, that if you see your brother's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your brother. If someone loses, if there's a lost object like a sheep or some animal and you find it, you have an obligation, a positive command to return that object. Now notice that the verse uses the word your brother. If your brother loses the ox, if your brother loses the sheep, then you have to return it to your brother. But who is considered your brother? One of the lines of the sages on Talmudic times said that Avedas Achicha, the object of your brother, excludes the Gentile. And this is where the archbishop gathered his information. But explained, Rabbi Nachum HaMeiri, who was a younger contemporary of Reb Shimon HaMeili in Provence in the 13th century, that is referring to only the Gentile who is of the 7 nations. But there's a whole other kind of non-Jew, and I want to read this to you in full. It follows that it is even forbidden to steal from idol worshippers and those who are not restricted by the ways of religion. If a Jew is sold to one of them, he may not be extracted from their possession without payment for his redemption. Similarly, it is prohibited to withhold payment for a debt owed to him. However, one is not obligated to seek out their lost object in order to return it. Furthermore, even one who finds a lost object of theirs is not obligated to return it. Finding a lost object is a partial acquisition, and returning it is considered pious behavior. We are not compelled to act piously towards someone who has no religion. We'll speak what that means. The same applies to their mistakes. If they made a mistake on their own, not a result of our deception or efforts, there's no obligation to return it. Nonetheless, if the Gentile became aware of it, the Jew is obligated to return it. Similar, even in the case of a lost object, if there's an element of desecration of God's name, it must be returned. Let's just pause over here to unpack what he's saying. The rabbi says is that there are layers in how we deal with people. First of all, it's prohibited to steal from anyone. Stealing is a common human value. Everyone is prohibited to steal from each other. There's never, whether it's an idol worshiper, 7 Canaanite, it doesn't matter. It is always prohibited to steal from someone. Now, when is it obligated to act in extra ways of piety? So returning a lost object, the rabbi explains, is not something that is required by every level of human law, but it's a pious act. If you find something in the street, you see it, you pick it up, you find out who the owner is, you announce it, you go to their house. That's a lot of extra obligations on you. That you do for a community of brothers. But who is considered your brothers? And if you continue reading, however, anyone who belongs to the nations restricted by the ways of religion, it's a very important phrase, and who serves God in any way, even if their belief is very different from ours, is not included in these rules. They are treated completely like Jews in such matters, including the obligation to return lost objects, the prohibition of taking advantage of anybody's mistakes, and all other related obligations without any difference. The rabbi in the 13th century, surrounded by an environment that is very harsh to Jews, says that Christians and all others of faith are included in the biblical command to return lost objects to your brother, because they are considered to us like brothers, and that there is no difference in the law in how one treats a fellow Jew or a non-Jew who is of what he calls restricted by the ways of religion. What is this category, restricted by the ways of religion? Why is this important? And where does the rabbis of Provence in the 13th century, where are their sources that such a category even exists? Now, you are fortunate in this crowd to have, as your presenter, someone who has done his doctorate on this very topic. So I have 300 pages of deep footnotes to share with you tonight, and will only be finished in 3 weeks' time. So I will give you a very abbreviated version, but this is certainly a particularly important topic to me. It says in the Bible, "V'chi amucha chicha amata yado imach, v'chzakta bo ger v'toshav v'chai imach." That if your brother becomes impoverished and his means falter with you, you shall support him, whether he is a ger v'toshav, and he must live with you. The Bible tells us that there's a category loosely translated as a ger v'toshav, a stranger and a resident. And this stranger and resident, in Hebrew, ger toshav, is for you like a brother that you must support. And the Bible is speaking to the Jews who are going into Israel. And they're telling them that when you are in Israel, it won't just be inhabited by Jews. It'll be inhabited also by the ger v'toshav, by the resident alien, someone who is different but of you. And you must support him and care for him. There's a mitzvah, there's an obligation to sustain him. More than that, the Torah says, you should make sure that he has food to give. You should make sure that he has what to eat, and lists a whole host of commands. The rabbis and the Talmud say, Ezu ger toshav, who is this ger toshav? Who is this non-Jew in the midst of the community that is deserving of these rights, that is treated as a brother? And the ancient rabbis of the Talmud offer two different opinions. One is someone who accepts on himself not to be a pagan, to worship idols. And I want to talk to you a little later, what does it mean to be an idol worshiper at the time, or what were the implications of being an idol worshiper at that time? The second opinion, the rabbis say, is someone who accepts to observe the 7 Noahide laws. Anyone who keeps the 7 Noahide laws is considered a ger v'toshav. The 7 Noahide laws are the most basic moral rules of not to kill, not to steal. Someone who's an upstanding citizen, a good person, who upholds the common morality, this is a person who's a ger v'toshav, that you must treat with these rights. For example, later on in the 12th century, Maimonides, in recording about the ger toshav, writes the following. Similarly, it appears to me that we must treat a ger toshav with decency and acts of kindness, just as we would do for a Jew. For we are commanded to sustain them, as it says, to the stranger in your gates you should give, and they shall eat. Even for Gentiles, all people, even the idolaters, the sages command us to visit their sick, bury their dead alongside Jewish dead, and support their poor as we support the poor of Israel. For these are the ways of peace. As it says, the Lord is good to all, and his mercies are over all his works. Everyone is a child of God. And all of these extend to all the children of God. Her ways, the Torah ways, are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. That's true for everyone. But the ger toshav, who is someone of extra moral quality, who shares our common sense of not to kill and not to murder, our basic moral code. This is one who is a fellow in your world. This is one who has to be treated to you like you would treat a brother. And this is the background for the 13th century Provence, for why these rabbis in southern France explained to the archbishop and to others that in the worldview of Judaism, the world is not divided into two categories. It's not divided between Jews and non-Jews. Theologically, we see this, for example, in Islam. You have Muslims, and then you have, let's say, idolaters, and then you have dhimmi. There's a status in the middle of dhimmi, which is the people of the book. And they separate out the people of the book with the special status, which applies and certainly applied to the Jewish community under Muslim rule. Christians as well, they were people of the book. Judaism similarly has a middle category. It's not, the world isn't divided between Jews and non-Jews. And what is the division? So it's interesting if you go back to what the rabbi said was important. What the rabbi said is matters to him in the Talmud. The rabbi says, look at the bold. What he says when he's speaking to his Jewish brothers, he says it's well known that when he's speaking to the archbishop, that you believe that the Creator is without beginning or end, created the upper and lower worlds, is immanent but unseen, examines the heart, rewards the good, and punishes the wicked. Why is that so important to the rabbi? Why does that make the non-Jewish neighbor fit into the category of Ger Toshav? So again, I'm going to give you the abbreviated version, but you can look up the book. That what the rabbi is saying is what matters to me is a common morality. And since you are believing in God, he's saying to the archbishop, a God that rewards and punishes, we know that you have an accountable moral code and that you share with us the same values. And therefore, we are one fellowship of faith. And that puts us in the same community. That you are in fact our brothers. That when we look at the world, we look at the world as, it's true, there's Jews, there's pagans in the antiquity, which were unruly, which were thought as those with no moral code, licentious and wild. And then there's our fellow brothers who share our sense of decency and goodness and morality. Now, in the 13th century, that applied specifically to those of faith. That is how the Me'ili and the Meiri frame it. I would say that today we could frame it differently, and that all those who share core covenantal values, the values of humanity and decency and morality, all those that share a sense of disdain for evil and who seek good, all those with the covenantal mission of seeking truth and respecting the humanity and godliness of every single individual. And these are the core values of Yeshiva University that's on our walls. If you come to Yeshiva University in New York, our core values are the infinite worth of every individual. How we need to act with compassion. How we need to seek to move history forward in a positive way, not just for the Jewish people, but through the Jewish people out into the world. These are the core covenantal values that bind us in a family of brothers and sisters. That's the category that unites not Jews and non-Jews, but a shared community of values. This is what the 13th century in Provence, and think about that. Think about what was going on around them at that time. The Jews were expelled, they were hated, they were tortured. That at this time the archbishop was threatening to expel the Jews and take away their livelihood. And during that period, the great rabbinic teachers and scholars contemplated that we are united with a sense of morality, that they could see and they know the goodness of their actual neighbors, not the warring marauders, and that we are united in a sense of fellowship and a sense of brotherhood. Now, this notion of Ger Toshav is something that is not just used to identify the one who is living within the midst of Israel, who is a fellow shared moral values. But in the Bible, Abraham uses this word to describe himself. He says, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. He says, throughout my time in Israel, I am like a stranger and a resident. that even though I've lived in Canaan for decades, I see myself and I know that I am a part from and a part of your society. Throughout history, the Jewish people have been visible within society, persevering their own culture, traditions, family lives, and societal norms. This separateness throughout history has always made the Jewish people a target for societal scapegoating, blame, and persecution. The Jews are the quintessential other. There is no one form that anti-Semitism has taken throughout history. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks once wrote, that anti-Semitism is not a unitary phenomenon, a coherent belief or ideology. Jews have been hated because they were rich and because they were poor, because they were capitalists and because they were communists, because they believed in tradition and because they were rootless cosmopolitans, because they kept to themselves and because they penetrated everywhere. Anti-Semitism is not a belief, but a virus. The human body has an immensely sophisticated immune system which develops defenses against viruses. It is penetrated, however, because viruses mutate. Anti-Semitism mutates. The Jews in society are the other, and we have, as such, been targeted in so many different ways. But being a ger toshav, a stranger and a resident, which has led to hate, envy, disgust, fear, and brutality against all forms, is also the same term that is used in Jewish scholarship to identify not just the Jews of themselves, but how we think of the non-Jewish other. And this gets to the heart of what I believe is not just the plight of the Jewish people, so to speak, but the opportunity and place of leadership for the Jewish people. The Jewish people understand deeply the societal negotiation that all people have between persevering our familial culture in a free and modern world, which while also being deeply integrated into the broader world. The description of the ger toshav is not just for the Jewish people, but a universal model that's used to imagine a future society of coexistence, a model where there's a balance between each of our respective identities and our common human morality that we share with each other. And this is the backdrop of my efforts after October 7th that Dr. Schuster referenced. I was in Jerusalem on October 7th. I heard the sirens go off, and I knew that Jerusalem was under attack. My son at the time was with me. He was told to check his phone. He opens his phone, and he was called up to service. My son is a combat soldier in the IDF. On October 7th, I was with him and sent my son off to war, an experience I don't wish on anyone. My son has spent over 200 days protecting the state of Israel and the Jewish people against the attack of Hamas this past year. But when I left him, I knew that I was returning to America with a mission, that I had a purpose. And I came back to an America where university presidents were not able to speak out against Hamas. University statements and programs for minority groups became unmoored from a cohesive vision of morality and mutual understanding, but recycled the tired and lazy framing of the oppressed oppressor instead of the more inclusive model of ger toshav, where all of us are, in a sense, alien and resident in this world. And we each need to learn how to both preserve our rights and culture without infringing on the other, but working to build a common morality. That we don't try to impose other identities on ourselves, which blunt the respective particulars, communities, and connections. Instead, we use our particular identities to further mutual understanding and in service of a better world to bring peace and understanding throughout society. In a sense, we're all ger toshav. Each of us is both a resident and an alien in this world. And the model that the Jewish teachings proposes for all of us is to build a world we're at once deeply at home at society at large with each of our particular identities. So I went to my university presidents and I called them all throughout the country. And I said, how could it be that you are not condemning Hamas? And we wrote a statement. And the statement said that we stand with Israel, with the Palestinian people who suffer under Hamas's cruel rule in Gaza, and all people of moral conscience. My first call was to a colleague from an HBCU, historically black college and university. She was the president of a college in Louisiana. I shared with her my sadness, and she said to me, Ari, the Jewish people win, referencing the biblical story, when Moses is holding his hands up. But who holds Moses' hands up? It's Aaron and Hur. Let us be your Aaron and Hur. You can lean on us. I then next called a colleague who's the president of all Christian colleges and universities throughout America. She has over 100 universities under her own name. And I shared with her the effort, and she said to me, Ari, you don't have to send me your letter. I'll sign anything you want. I'm here for you. I'm standing by you. It was so interesting that the first universities that joined together was the ones that understood that the struggle of preserving a particular way of life in the modern world is not just a struggle, but it's a privilege and a responsibility. And they joined with me. And from there, we expanded to major public and private universities, University of Texas, University of Miami, Arizona State, the Chancellor of the State of University of New York, the Chancellor of the City of University of New York. We had over 100 university presidents throughout the country. Full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal, network interviews, billions of media engagements. And what we showed is that after October 7th, there is a fellowship of people who stand with a sense of common humanity and who know that you can never stand quietly against an organization who in its charter writes that they're there to eliminate the state of Israel and kill all of its Jewish citizens. That this is not a political debate. There's a need for moral clarity and the importance of separating the Palestinians from Hamas is urgent. And I said this to presidents, universities throughout the country, that if you don't distinguish between them, you are hurting your students who are pro-Palestinian, because you are staining them with the evil reputation of Hamas. And they need to be free to actually engage in real conversations about the Palestinians' national rights, about the ethos of war. Let them have those conversations without the blood-curdling growlies and cries from the river to the sea. You can't engage in university conversations. You can't be a university if you do not clarify what moral clarity means. What is your purpose anyway, if not to educate your students to be moral citizens of your country? And I'm pleased to say that so many of my colleagues joined with me in this effort. They joined in a sense of common morality by placing their names and their individual identities standing at the same time of who they are, but embracing this fellowship of core morality. I believe that this model of Ger Toshav is exactly what we are looking for and need today. And I can tell you that we're ready as a society to embrace it. We need to relearn in this global modern world how to embrace what makes each of us different, embracing our strengths and our traditions, and at the same time, what is common and good and decent amongst all of us. In the past, the other has been victimized and villainized. Now it's time to protect and to project. For each community deserves safety and security within their own values that they foster, projected universally throughout the world. Otherness has been weaponized to further anti-Semitism. Now it's time to flip the script, the Jewish people as a model for universal understanding and coexistence. And so I stand here to present to you something that's not often spoken about. We often speak about anti-Semitism, and it's true, anti-Semitism is real. And when it shows up, we need to identify it, understand it, and to combat it with everything we have. But rather than Jews, God forbid, hiding our distinctiveness, we must use our difference to find those who respect difference, to find the angels and the partners who join us with their own identities to build a better world through embracing both distinction and common morality. After October 7th, we have seen the worst in humanity. But I am here to share with you that after October 7th, I have seen the best of humanity. And I know that we can build towards a better future for all. And it's my true privilege to stand here in Berlin, to stand here in Humboldt University, who are partners with our law school and the law faculty, where we share students. Yeshiva University, the flagship Jewish university, and Humboldt University in Berlin as a model of this coexistence, of how we can work together and build a better society for everyone. That is the opportunity of today. The seeds of redemption are planted in times of darkness. We experience the darkness, but it's here and it's growing. And if we work together, we will reap the rewards of a society filled with love, hope, and promise. May we see that time come soon.